Today I want to discuss the topic of Israel versus Muslim countries, and I want to focus on issue why Muslim countries hate Israel state, because most Muslims you see that they act like Israel state should not exist, and they use terms like globalize the intifada or from the river to the sea Palestine will be free, and of course these are euphemisms. So euphemism is something which in lighter form or not in true form should tell you about what you really want to do with someone or something. So it is like a delicate way of saying that Israel, in this case, it is a delicate saying that Israel should not exist, should be destroyed, and and its population should be ruled or do an ethnic cleansing to it. And we see it in general in Palestinian population, but also in Muslim population. But the thing is, why really Muslims hate Israel? Why they hate this state? And they don't call it Israel. They call it entity or occupying force. They don't even use the term Israel. And it's because they know that they are the real colonizers of this land. So before even colonization began, or this term was used to describe the European forces conquering different lands on our globe, on Earth, on other continents than Europe. Muslims expanded from Arabian Peninsula, and they conquered a lot of lands on the west side of the continent and on the east side of the continent. And one of the first regions being conquered and being occupied by Muslims was a Byzantine Empire, parts of Byzantine Empire, and Palestine, Israel was then a region in a Byzantine Empire. So, in this lecture, I will be using the term occupiers, even though the term is too strong, because occupying force is someone like when you have a war, a very serious war, a very brutal war, and so on. But when you rule some parts of the world, you are just a colonizer, or let's say a ruler. Or a conqueror of some land, but let's say that we see that Palestinians and Arabs and Muslims will like to use the term colonizer or the term occupier, so we can say that Arabs were the colonizers of these regions, and they of course destroyed all or almost all temples in when they were conquering for their religion. They destroyed and conquered and evaporated many temples, Jewish temples and also Christian temples. That's why they use the term kufar or the term disbelievers, to show that those who don't believe in Islam are really disbelievers, and they are the second class citizens at best, or at worst they should be immediately killed if they don't convince that the Islam is true religion and they don't become a Muslim. So we see that Arab colonization of these lands were swift, was fast, and also was brutal, savage, and very long, because from the perspective of Arabs, they started beginning their great conquers in 7th century, so in early let's say Middle Ages, and they ruled these lands for very long. And there were periods, of course, when the Crusaders took the Palestine, then Ottomans ruled for Turkish Ottomans ruled for about 300 to 400 years. But then British, of course, ruled Palestine as a mandate, but Arabs were still there, so they were still living in Palestine, even though some other entity or some other empire ruled those lands. But Muslims in general, because Muslims is a broader term than just a Palestinian or just an Arab. We have like 1,700,000,000 Muslims right now, maybe even more. They use this term. They hate the Israel not only because of the Jews, but because of what Jews were able to do. And it reminded them, Muslims, they reminded them that their religion was created in a fog of war. The Muhammad, the person who created Islam, was a warrior, was someone who was killing other Arabs in the name of his religion, and his successors and his companions win this war, because at the beginning, of course, when they were conquering lands near Mecca and Medina, they were fighting with other Arab tribes, with Arabs who believe in polytheistic religions, in many gods and so on. And Islam is strictly monotheistic religion, believing only in one God, Allah. But first stages of Islam, it was a great success. They conquered in about 200 years, so let's say from about 630 to about 830, they conquered lands to the west, and even to in even whole Spain and even some parts of France. And in the west, they conquered lands to modern day Bangladesh. Then it was generally India, whole India, Sri Lanka. Those countries were conquered. So Islam was a really a success in terms of military victories. And of course, military victories means that someone is killed, but for Muslims, it's not that important, because they were the rulers, they were the victors. So of course they didn't ask Indians how many Indians were slaughtered, killed, or tortured, or how many Christians or how many Zoroastrians in Iranian Empire were killed. But now the situation is different. Now the countries of other religions, so disbelievers, are winning with Muslims, because Israel have won many wars with Arab countries, and probably if they wanted to win more and conquer more lands, like for example in Lebanon, in Syria, they would do it. They would do it because Arabs cannot win any simple war for many centuries from now, and they know it. That's why they use these guerrilla tactics, which often is bringing more destructions to Muslims than victories to them. Because, for example, even the slaughterhouse of Jews on October 7th, 2023, there were like 1,200 Jews murdered, 300 of them soldiers, rest civilians, but Palestinian casualties in the death only is about 60,000. So we see that these guerrilla tactics, these tactics of being a thug or trying to do as many damage to civilians, is completely unsuccessful and damaging. And also Muslims are aware that Israel is able to conquer many more lands of Muslim countries. They just don't do it because they are too small in population. There is about 10 million Jews in Israel, 17 million at max in the whole world. And Muslims are aware that if they were more expansive nation, like for example Christians, they would just conquer them. So they hate Israel because afraid of Israel and afraid of its potential, because the potential of Israel army is really huge. It's one of the best. I suppose it's in case of quality, it's in first 10 best armies in the world. So they are really capable of conquer many lands. They just don't want to do it, and they don't have means in case of population, because you need to colonize these areas, bring your own settlers, and so on and so on. But Muslim countries also are afraid of Israel's situation, because it remembers them, probably not explicitly, but they remember the case of Iberian Peninsula, so Spain and Portugal, because Spain and Portugal, they were fighting Reconquista, so reconquer of the lands took by Muslims. And this process of Reconquista in case of Spain, it took like 780 years or something like that. So very long period of war in Spain or in Iberian Peninsula to reconquer those lands. And Muslims are aware that Jews, of course, did the same. They just reconquered the lands which were conquered by the Arabs, and they were the rulers. But they reconquered it, so they did a Reconquista, and Muslims probably are thinking that maybe the same case can be in, let's say, North African countries, or let's say in India, because India is ruled by Indians now, but about 200 million Indians in India are Muslims. All Bengali people, or almost all Bengali people, and almost all Pakistani people are Muslims, but they are not native Muslims. They were conquered by the Arabs and a little bit by other tribes like Persians and so on, and they were forced to believe in Allah, in Islam. So the biggest part of Muslims is not in the native lands of Arab countries or in Arabian Peninsula, but in South Asia, in India, Bangladesh, Pakistan. It's about, I think, 600 million Muslims, maybe even 700. So it's a really huge number, and Muslims are aware that it can be that there can be a reversal situation, that some stronger entity could conquer their lands and of course bring its own religion, because this is the case when, for example, conquistadors when Spain reconquered its lands, it expanded to the west, and the conquistadors, as Catholics, as Knights of Spain, conquered almost, let's say in general, all Americas, North and South. So we see and where where do we have the greatest population of Christians? Not in Europe, but of course in Americas, because in Americas almost all people are Christians. Only in United States and in Canada there are more Protestants. In South America and in Mexico and on Caribbean there are let's say in Caribbean it's a mix, Protestant and Catholics, and in South America it's Catholics. Or in Latin America, because Mexico is in North America also. So we see that that creation of Israel is like new Reconquista for Muslims, and they know that Israel is a very potent country. It is, of course, a tiny country, one of the smallest countries in the world, and Jews don't have the number to colonize the world, but there are other nations who are able to do it. Maybe Americans, maybe British, maybe Spanish. We don't know. We don't know what the future will bring, but but we see even in case of war, Ukraine-Russian war, that if some empire is big enough, has enough means, it can conquer other lands, and in case of Russia, it can be called Reconquista of Ukraine, because Ukraine from 16th century, let's say circa, was ruled by some parts, bigger parts by Russia, and minor parts by Poland. So we see that the rules can change, and the situation can change, and even sometimes it can change dramatically. So for Muslims, this propaganda to show that Palestine is occupied, then Israel is just an entity, is showing their hatred toward Jews, of course, but hatred toward Jews is normal, because Jews were always hated by Christians and by Muslims because of their different religion. And religions generally hate each other, or just don't like each other. Christianity don't like Islam, Islam don't like Christianity, Buddhism don't like Hinduism, Hinduism don't like Buddhism, and so on and so on. So this problem of Israel entity, as they call it, can be much bigger for Muslim community, because they know that they are completely not prepared to to not be conquered by different civilizations or even different religions. And they solved this in example of Iraq, when American army just conquer Iraq very fast. They just couldn't govern it, because there were interior tensions between Sunnis and Shia Muslims. But if they wanted to rule with an iron fist, they could do it, yes, and they could, for example, occupy Iraq to this day. They just didn't want to do it. So for Muslims, this Israel case, and it is of course the case of honor, because they are aware that Jews are a minority. It's like 17 million Jews, and Muslims are 1,600,000,000. So the numbers are not even, and they are aware of it, that it is dishonored for them that Arabs cannot, let's say, destroy this country and conquer it again, as they did in earlier episodes of their rules. And at the beginning of its ruling and its conquest, they conquered not only Palestine, but many more parts of Byzantine Empire and other empires. So I think that this hatred and this wanting to destroy Israel is out of fear that some politicians can be more aggressive than today's ones or modern ones. Because, for example, this is the topic on another discussion, but in the case of Jerusalem and Al-Aqsa Mosque and the Dome of the Rock, Jews are ruling in Jerusalem, so they could destroy those temples and build or rebuild their own temple, because it was destroyed by Romans in ancient times. And the Dome of the Rock specifically is where the temple, the Jewish temple, stood, and the Muslims were aware of this. That's why they built their own temple, to show that their God Allah is true, and Yahweh, the God of Jews, is false, is not true, and they are disbelievers. So Muslims know that Jews are just very, very tolerant, much more tolerant than they, or even than the Christians, and they just allow it. But there can be much more far-right politicians in Israel who could say, wait a minute, our temple was destroyed by Romans, then Muslims built their own temples on the ruins of our, because in ancient times Jews didn't have, let's say, other synagogues or other temples. It was just this one big temple, Later, it of course changed. So we see that they live in a fear that Jews can do much more damage to them that right now they are doing, because Muslims would just destroy everything if they have the power to do it. We saw this in Spain, we saw this in Portugal, we saw this in conquest of Iberian Peninsula, we saw this in conquest of India. Not all Indian temples were destroyed, or all Buddhist temples were destroyed, but let's say majority of them. We saw this in modern day Afghanistan and so on. So let me know in the comments what do you think about this topic.